My client, who asked to be called John, abandoned his family when they needed him most for the sake of his circle of friends with left-wing political views. However, this new community turned out to be indifferent to John and even betrayed him when it suited their interests. Now my client is alone and trying to repair what remains of his life. He wants to understand the true motives behind his actions and fix the situation he ended up in.
Once I was the eldest son and heir of a wealthy family, a smart and capable young man with enormous potential and dreams of changing the world. Now I sit in a cheap apartment with no idea where to go next. I have neither education, nor support, nor family, nor even a close circle of friends. I hit rock bottom in just a few years, but the worst part is that there's no one left who could pull me out of this state. And it's all because I pushed everyone away myself, but realized it too late. I grew up in comfort, which I took for granted and considered normal. But only now have I understood that although the US offers huge opportunities for career growth and financial prosperity, the level of above average is actually achieved by a very small percentage of people. I used to get angry at the system, politicians, capitalists when thinking about this. Now I realize how much of an idiot I was back then and how important it was to appreciate the results of my parents' hard work. After all, it was they who gave me a great foundation for future success. They also gave me love and understanding, but they showed it not at all in the way I wanted or could accept. I only realized this during therapy and felt even greater shame than before. However, I will still tell my story in order. Sorry. My parents were classic representatives of the generation that built themselves up from nothing. My father started from scratch in an investment bank. My mother was a lawyer who turned her firm into one of the most successful in the state. They were the kind of couple you see in financial magazines, smiling, holding champagne glasses at charity events. I was their first child, and now I can conclude that they were not fully prepared for my arrival in their lives. They were happy, and I was a wanted son whom they loved. Yet raising a child was not their main priority. I no longer blame them for this. My parents came from much harsher families, where not only neglect but also several lashes with a belt were considered acceptable parenting. My grandparents were not judged by my parents but were valued and respected. Naturally, they expected much better treatment from me since they were giving me everything they didn't have in their childhood. They gave me toys, birthday parties, and an excellent education. My childhood was spent between nannies and private schools. But I missed the time spent together. I don't criticize my parents as much as before, but I still insist that spending time together is the key to genuine emotional closeness between parents and children.
As a specialist, I emphasize that my guest is right. Indeed, the time spent together is key to creating and maintaining genuine, strong family relationships. This includes shared meals and rest, which help one feel important and needed. Parents often do a great deal for their children's future, which is extremely valuable. However, children need the presence of their parents here and now, and this should be remembered.
I can't say my parents were cold toward me. They tried to spend time with me, hug me, and always praised and encouraged me. Even when I was moody, they were patient. I never heard them shout, let alone use a belt. In short, they tried not to repeat their parents' mistakes, and I am very grateful to them for that. It's a pity I didn't tell them this earlier. However, the lack of shared time was a real problem. Sometimes we wouldn't see each other for a week. A nanny can't replace a mother or father. As a schoolboy, I tried to be obedient and diligent, had many hobbies, and wanted to share my achievements with my parents. But as a teenager, I began to get angry. I didn't understand why everything business, clients, courts, stocks was more important to them than me. Why my talks about books or wanting to learn to play guitar were seen as noise, as something interfering with their plans. Maybe that's why I demanded a lot of attention from my first girlfriend, Sarah. She was the daughter of one of my father's business partners. When we first met in our senior year, that detail didn't matter much to me. What caught my attention more was that Sarah was stunningly beautiful. Soft, light hair, incredibly deep blue eyes, unique facial features. Trends in fashion play an important role for many girls, and given the pressure of the beauty industry, that's understandable. But my Sarah was never controlled by that. She had delicate features, elegant lips, and freckles. This wasn't considered beautiful among her friends, but Sarah didn't care. She was stubborn and wanted to be accepted as she was. So besides her striking beauty, I was drawn to her strength of character. Still, she never competed with me or tried to show off how cool she was. With her, I could relax and feel needed, important. Now I realize that with her, I could be myself, and that is incredibly valuable in a relationship, right? I often whined to her about how my parents didn't love me, but she pointed out how much they actually did for me. I wanted her to just pity me, not justify them, so I got angry and sometimes even argued with her because of it. However, aside from that, Sarah showed me complete support and love. If I wanted attention, her time, or just a hug, she was always ready to give it to me. It seems to me her inner strength came from a deep understanding of who she was and who she wanted to be. We were each other's first when it came to intimate relationships, and that was very important to Sarah. She said she didn't think it was important to save her virginity until marriage or anything like that, but now I was a close person to her. When I recall those words, I feel both bitter and warm inside. How lucky I was to have Sarah in my life, and how hopelessly stupid I was to lose her. My life changed when I entered college. It was a college with a world-renowned reputation where children from elite families studied. I won't name it, but those who follow the political situation in the country can easily guess. This college offers a very cool and interesting program in many fields, from law to art history. Of course, studying at such an institution is a sign of status and wealth, since the tuition cost is a small fortune, enough to buy a medium-sized town in a third-world country. But at the same time, the college was filled with rather skeptical attitudes toward capitalism and authority. My description isn't specific enough for you to guess exactly which college I mean, but I've narrowed it down, haven't I? Alongside students whose education was paid for by wealthy parents, there were those who got in thanks to grants, scholarships, or simply because they were the best. And among this diverse crowd, I first truly felt that I was nobody. Other golden children easily found friends, parties, and professors who supported them. And I was alone again. Of course, I didn't carry my resentment toward my parents as the main theme of my life. Still, since childhood, I was quite withdrawn, had trouble making contact, and making friends. There was nothing in my appearance or behavior that could provoke rejection or bullying from peers, yet I never made really close friends at school. So maybe in my teenage loneliness, I wrongly blamed my parents, and the problem was actually with me. I don't know. I hope my description doesn't sound like the whining of a rich kid. I'm just trying to explain why I was vulnerable. Because in that emptiness, among halls with columns and libraries full of antique books, I first heard the loud voices of those shouting about inequality, injustice, and a world that needs to be changed. They were students wearing Che Guevara t-shirts, quoting Marx, and discussing colonialism over lactose-free lattes. They seemed aggressive and united. At first, I avoided them because I feared their judgment. I thought they looked at a boy from a wealthy family without enthusiasm. But then I realized their circle was much more open than I initially thought. That made me very happy. Much later, I realized my mistake. Too late, I understood that their fiery talks condemning capitalism were just a cover. They spoke about equality convincingly, and that blinded me. Foolishly, I could easily assess the value of the watches, bags, and boots of these young people comfortably living on their parents' money. The students who studied thanks to grants and scholarships were busy with more important matters. They studied. But back then, I didn't understand that yet. I was just glad I had found my pack. You know? So I fit into a circle of people like me, offended young people who found a common enemy in the phantom image of capitalism. At one of those meetings, I met Alice. She was bright. Green hair, a nose piercing, a scar on her eyebrow, a mark from some protest, as she proudly told me. She immediately took me under her wing, started introducing me to other activists, dragging me to lectures. She said I was a privileged male with a colonial background but had the potential to change for the better. Alice and the group she introduced me to were charismatic and educated. They were senior students who could wrap almost any idea in an exciting verbal shell. I missed the moment when this started to affect me, and I believed in their authority. They threw parties where they listened to vinyl records and discussed aesthetic cinema from the last century. It was interesting and cool, and politics sometimes wasn't even a topic at such gatherings. However, in conversations, there was occasionally negativity directed at the bourgeois middle class. At these times, they looked at me as if I embodied collective guilt and had to apologize to every woman simply for having different chromosomes. And you know what? It worked. I began to behave as if my family had actually done something wrong, as if my parents oppressed someone just by building their careers successfully, and now I had to pay this debt to strangers. Maybe I just didn't want to become an outcast or feel lonely again. Or maybe the propaganda took root in the fertile soil of my childhood grievances. Sarah felt completely like an outsider in their group. To her, I was a beloved boyfriend, not just a walking set of social stereotypes. Sarah reacted negatively to my new friends. She was struck both by the aggression in their speech and by the way they treated me like a junior assistant who had somehow wronged someone. Her eyes lit up when I talked about my ideas, even when they were foolish. She believed in me. Alice said I had great potential, although I was still just on the path. But from Alice's point of view, Sarah was entirely unawakened and a patriarchy enabler. And I was a fool because instead of defending my girlfriend in front of those idiots, I silently listened as they devalued the dream Sarah and I shared. Maybe the problem was again that Sarah and I didn't spend enough time together, and it showed. Our courses were different and the subjects were often taught far apart. We could only talk in the evenings, but Alice made up some very important reasons for me to be in her company. And Sarah? Well, if you believe Alice, my girlfriend didn't understand the issues of gender, racism, and class struggle. She didn't want to read English language manifestos or go on strikes. And I, the idiot, began to drift away from her and actually saw her much less often.
I avoid discussing political ideologies during therapy sessions, and everything my client says on this topic is his personal opinion and assessment. I am open to constructive dialogue and work with people from various backgrounds, upholding timeless human values. In particular, I hope that this anonymous yet public story will benefit my client and help him rebuild the life he lost.
Then I made an irreversible mistake, one without excuse. I betrayed Sarah with Alice. It was after another party. I don't remember how or when Alice and I ended up alone in a room, but she immediately threw herself at me. I had never felt such passion before. It was something primal and aggressive. For the first time, I felt a woman desire me that strongly. At first, though, I pushed her away and said I had a girlfriend, but Alice wasn't offended and declared that monogamy was just another stereotype imposed on us by the patriarchy. She said we must free ourselves from it. She claimed that if Sarah didn't understand my needs, then she wasn't really close to me. And if she got offended by this outburst of passion, it meant she considered me her possession, not a person. Now I just don't understand how I could have believed such nonsense. But I did, and I betrayed my girlfriend. At first, I thought it was just a protest, something ideological. But it was banal. I was flattered that someone as loud and fearless as Alice noticed me. I felt like I finally belonged to something important, that I finally had the family I had so desperately needed. I tried to hide my affair with Alice, but she could publicly start kissing me. When rumors about Alice and me reached Sarah, the inevitable awaited me. Sarah, she was normal, you see? And she reacted to the betrayal of her beloved man as any adequate woman should, with anger, hurt, and tears. For a moment, the pain in her eyes made me question what I was doing with my life. But the guilt was so uncomfortable and frightening that instead of apologizing and trying to make amends, I started repeating what Alice had told me. Sarah couldn't believe I was covering up betrayal with fake ideology. She said she didn't recognize me and didn't want to see me anymore. Our breakup caused such a deep depression in Sarah that she quit school. Of course, my parents found out, so the next time I was home, they organized a serious talk. It was a turning point, my personal point of no return. Even before that, I often argued with my parents trying to promote my ideas, which they didn't understand at all. Mom thought it was a passing trend, that it would pass when I grew up and got to know the world better. Dad was stricter. He took my words about the oppression of the working class personally. My paternal grandfather was an ordinary electrician with a drinking problem, and his mother was a schoolteacher. So my dad built his career and wealth by himself. His life was living proof disproving the nonsense about class struggle. Still, I threw insulting words at him, not because I believed them, but because I realized I had hit a nerve. And I liked feeling either my power over his moral state or his irritation. I was taking revenge on him, not realizing I was only hurting myself. That evening, when my parents wanted to discuss why I had hurt Sarah, I began to defend myself too aggressively. Mom wanted to smooth things over and said they had very important and wonderful news for me. But I didn't hear her. Or rather, I didn't want to hear her. Instead, I declared that they were my class enemies, that they didn't understand me and never loved me, and that I could build not only monogamous but any other kinds of relationships with anyone. Dad seemed to explode. He grabbed me by the back of the head and forced me to look up at the elegant living room where we sat and then at the shelf above the fireplace. There were my medals, diplomas, certificates for every contest and tournament, whether in sports, poetry, or drawing. Everything I loved as a child was amateurish, but my parents kept every piece of my past as a memory. They were proud of me. Dad tried to show me this and to point out that the comfort they lived in was created, among other things, for me. But I was too hyped from the argument. And, like with Sarah, the shame from realizing my father was right stirred anger in me. Instead of apologizing, I shrugged off my father's hand, and then I hit him. I will regret this act for the rest of my life, and its consequences practically destroyed me.
The fight with his own father marked the beginning of a tragic chain of events. In the second part of his story, my client will share how, due to Alice's manipulation and betrayal, he not only suffered an assault but also ended up virtually homeless after being expelled from college. In the meantime, subscribe to my channel and give this video a like so I know that my work on this project is not in vain. Please also take a moment to consider my experiments with the visual elements, design, and other details. Creating videos is something new for me, so I'm open to your suggestions and advice on how to improve the quality of my work. I would really appreciate your feedback on the choice of background music, visual styling, and so on. However, while I do want to make these stories as accessible and comfortable to watch as possible for a wide audience, my top priority is the core idea of the project, combining anonymity with public confession. That's why I feel the need to include a traditional note about the safety and purpose of this project. To protect anonymity, the images and voices have been altered using advanced technology. This has made it possible to share my guests' deeply personal and morally complex story in full detail with a wide audience, without fear of revealing their identity. It allows for honest feedback from viewers, which may help ease the burden on my guests' heart and provide advice from a large number of objectively minded individuals. Names, locations, and some details have been changed for privacy reasons. Any similarities are purely coincidental. The story is presented as a work of fiction, even if it is based on real events or emotions.